Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, it is a mock draft Monday edition of the Locked On Titans podcast, but with a little bit of a twist. On today's show, I want to take a look at some trade scenarios for the Titans. We're going to look at 7-round mock drafts done by yours truly. We're going to examine what would it look like if the Titans traded up? What would it look like if the Titans traded down? What would it look like if the Titans traded up on day 2? We're going to examine all of those different scenarios on a mock draft Monday edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. Let's get it.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Titans fans, it is a mock draft Monday edition of the Locked On Titans podcast with a little bit of a trade twist. We're going to go over 7-round mock drafts, looking at trade scenarios for the Titans. We're going to start with them trading up in the first round. But before we get into that, do got to remind you guys that today's show is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. Also, got to thank you guys for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen every day. If this is your first ever listen to the Locked On Titans podcast, make sure you subscribe on whatever platform you do stream. You're going to find the Locked On Titans podcast available and free on all platforms. That includes the Locked On Titans YouTube channel. Subscribe over there. Smash that notification bell so you know when all the content goes live. Throw a thumbs up on the video if you're watching on YouTube right now. You can follow me on social media at Tic Tac Titans on Twitter, at Locked On Titans Pod on Facebook. Monday through Friday, daily Tennessee Titans podcast all year round. So make sure that you stay locked in to the Locked On Titans podcast. But with that being said, let's dive into our first 7-round mock draft of the day. And again, we are going to examine what it would look like if the Titans traded up. And for me, pretty simple. The Titans should only trade up for one position, and it's offensive tackle. Yeah, I'd like a quarterback in this draft. If it makes sense at pick 26. If the Titans trade back a couple of picks, then yeah, maybe quarterback. I'd like wide receiver too, but are the wide receivers going to fall? The top 5? Maybe not. If they're there, then sure, take the wide receiver. But we don't know if all 5 or any of the 5 will drop to 26. And I don't really feel good about reaching for a Sky Moore or a Jahan Dotson or a Christian Watson or George Pickens. So for me, the only option for the Titans in a trade up, because I don't trade up for the quarterbacks and I don't trade up for wide receiver, is offensive tackle. And the only offensive tackle that realistically could be had with a trade up and makes sense for the Titans is Trevor Penning, the nasty road grader out of Northern Iowa. So yeah, he's not a perfect prospect, Penning. Sometimes the demeanor and the nastiness is a little more enticing than the tape itself. He's got some balance issues, some hand placement issues to work through, but just a perfect fit mentality-wise for the Titans. But here's the thing. Penning's not going to last to 26, most likely. So if the Titans want him, they'd have to go up and get him. And what would that trade look like? Well, the Philadelphia Eagles sit at pick 15. And in my opinion, you look at the Eagles at 15, the Saints at 16, the Chargers at 17, the Eagles at 18, and the Saints at 19. Those 5 picks, Penning's going to go with one of those 5 picks. So if the Titans want to get their hands on Trevor Penning, I think they got to trade up to either 14 with Baltimore or 15 with Philadelphia, who may be willing, with so many picks that they have, may be willing to move back down into the first round and collect even more as they amount an incredible treasure trove to try to make a move in 2023 for a quarterback. So pick 15, what would it take? 26, 90, and next year's third rounder. So we saw the Jets go from 23 to 14 last year for that same package to go up and get an offensive lineman. I think we're going to see a similar package if one needs to be made. If the Titans went up, I think they'd package 90, 26, and next year's third rounder. That's about 1,030 points on the trade charts to 15, which is about 1,050. So you're right there in perfect value. The Titans move up to 15. They get Trevor Penning. Now, the problem is the Titans wouldn't have a pick from 15 all the way to 131. So I still think that wide receiver is a need, and I don't want to miss out on too many. So from that point, what I decided to do was make another trade up. We're going to go from 131 to pick 109. Going to call the Seattle Seahawks, who trying to acquire a bunch of picks as well. We're going to say, hey, Seattle, I'm going to give you pick 131 and pick 143, which is about 76 points on the trade chart. And we're going to go up to pick 109, which is also 76 points on the trade chart. So a perfect trade. And with pick 109, the Titans are going to select Alec Pierce, the big body, tall, long wide receiver out of Cincinnati. I think you got A.J. Brown as your threat over the middle of the field. You add a big, long, tall guy who can get down the field, make catches over the top, and Alec Pierce out of Cincinnati. I think that's a nice fit there. And at 109, had to go in before you get too far in the weeds. I like Velus Jones, guys, but that doesn't satisfy the wide receiver need. So Pierce was like the last wide receiver available. You had Wendell Robinson or Calvin Austin or like I just mentioned, Velus Jones. Yeah, those guys are solid, but I think that Pierce is a tier above those guys. So I got the last wide receiver in my second tier of wide receivers with Pierce by giving up 131 and 143 and moving up to 109. That means the Titans don't have a pick until 169. We get to pick 169, and I'm taking Cole Turner out of Nevada, a guy with run after the catch ability. He's going to be able to play multiple spots for you at tight end. I think there's a lot of good value late in the draft at tight end with how stocked the position is in the middle. So get Cole Turner out of Nevada. Go to pick 204. You get Jonye Thomas from Georgia Tech, who's 6'1", versatile safety. I think he can be groomed to potentially be a starter, but can immediately play sub-package linebacker. He's a physical guy, likes to come downhill, strong tackler. I like Thomas right there as a safety for the Titans to take that Dane Cruikshank role early on and maybe be developed into more. And then at 219, the last pick, you got Michael Clemens from Texas A&M. The Titans were on hand to scout him at his pro day. Clemens is more of a Rashad Weaver guy, a big-bodied defensive end type. I think he can have value for the Titans as a 4-3 defensive end, which the Titans run a ton of 4-3 now. He could also kick down and rush from the interior, so it's kind of another Rashad Weaver type guy. I think that would be a valuable pick at 219 for the Titans. So Trevor Penning, Alec Pierce, Cole Turner. We get offensive tackle, wide receiver, tight end. Thomas at safety, Clemens at edge rusher, adding depth at two positions that need depth on defense. Now, I got to tell you, this isn't my favorite mock draft of the day, but if the Titans decided to trade up, this is exactly what it could look like. But we're going to move to the trade down mock draft for today's show. Before we get into that, though, do want to tell you guys more about today's title sponsor, BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information for all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. Make sure that you check out BetOnline. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about all the trends and all the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Titans fans, let's continue this Mock Draft Monday edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. We're taking a look at some trade scenarios for the Titans. We just looked at a trade up in the first round. Now we're going to look at a trade back in the first round. Before we get into that, I do got to thank you guys for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen every day. But now it's time for a big announcement. Draft season is here. It's almost time for the NFL draft, and nobody covers it like the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure that you guys tune in on April the 28th to the Locked On NFL Drafts live coverage of the 2022 NFL Draft. We're going to be bringing you real-time analysis all 3 days from a lineup with our experts and our insiders, including your boy. If you want some draft content before we kick off our live coverage, make sure you check out the Ultimate Mock Draft 2022. It is kicking off today April 18th and going throughout the rest of the week until April 22nd. It's going to finish next Monday on the 25th. A mock draft pick by each of the hosts of each Locked On show. So, of course, I am making the pick for the Tennessee Titans. Make sure you guys check out that podcast feed. And then, of course, the Locked On NFL Draft live show, which will be all 3 days of the NFL Draft live on YouTube. So check that out right now. But diving into this next mock draft, it is a trade down scenario for the Tennessee Titans. So pick 26 comes. The Titans say, hey, we don't see a lot of value here. Let's move down. Where could they move down to? Well, I think a move that makes a lot of sense is pick 40 with the Seattle Seahawks. So Seattle is accumulating as many assets as possible as they try to get that roster back to good. They have pick 40 and pick 41. So an easy move to make. And who needs a quarterback? Seattle. Hello. So Seattle can use pick 9, get a good player to position a need, then take pick 26 and pick 169 for the Titans, which is 724 points on the trade chart. And you trade that back to Seattle for pick 40 and pick 72, which is 730 points. So 724 to 730, realistic trade. Seattle comes up to 26, and they took Desmond Ridder in this mock draft that I was doing. So that makes sense. Seattle comes up and gets their quarterback. We've heard a lot about the Titans being interested in quarterbacks. Maybe it's a smokescreen. Maybe they're enticing someone to trade up by having rumored interest. You want to get in front of Tampa Bay. You want to get in front of Detroit. You want to get in front of anybody else who could trade up. Especially because I'm starting to think that these quarterbacks are going to start to fall back. And there will be a lot of quarterbacks, Corral, Ridder, Howe, that will be available in the late first round. And that can entice teams to trade up and get that 5th year of team control with the 5th year option in the first round. So the trade is 26 and 169 for 40 and 72. At pick 40, I was able to select Christian Watson from North Dakota State. I've fallen in love with Christian Watson, 6'4", 4.3 40, blazing speed, took handoffs, started a game at running back as a senior at 6'4". I think he's the yards after catch ability the Titans want, with the big bodied physicality, with superstar level size speed combination. Again, I know that this is a crazy take, but watching Christian Watson dominate at North Dakota State, it just reminded me of Randy Moss. Now, I'm not saying that Christian Watson looks like Randy Moss in college or that Christian Watson is going to be Randy Moss. I'm just saying the way that he dominated that level of competition. It looked like Randy Moss out there. So love that Christian Watson fell to 40. I doubt that happens in real life, quite frankly. But hey, this is the mock draft that I'm going with. A trade down to 40. You take yourself Christian Watson. You feel great about it. Pick 72. A lot of interior offensive line. A lot of tight ends available. Some good talent at other positions. But me, I went ahead and got that interior offensive lineman. I went with Cole Strange from Chattanooga. Nasty, athletic. I mean, I think that Strange is a perfect fit for the Titans scheme. So him at 72, we're off to a banner start. Pick number 90. There's still a lot of tight ends available, and I really could have maybe waited, but I decided to go ahead and get the tight end that I think fits perfectly with what the Titans need right now, and that's Isaiah Likely out of Coastal Carolina. He gives me Delanie Walker vibes. 6'4", incredible yards after catch, twitchy, burst out of his routes. Yeah, he needs some help technique, blocking, needs to add some mass. He's not an incredibly skilled route runner right now, but you can work on all that. Right now, the Titans have Austin Hooper and Jeff Swaim, who are like the same version, or like the same person, just different talent levels. Swaim obviously nowhere near as fluid and talented as Hooper, but the point is the Titans have that inline wide tight end that's going to block, that doesn't have a lot of yards after catch ability. It's going to get open, catch the ball, and fall down. They need a guy who's great yards after the catch, who's a good athlete, who's bursty and twitchy, and that's what you're going to get with Isaiah Likely. I think this is just a great start for the Titans. Now, you don't have another pick until 131. Amari Barno, Virginia Tech edge rusher. I love Barno. All the athletic traits that you could ever want in an edge rusher. But he's got to refine his technique. Not only that, though, but Barno has shown he could drop back into coverage as well. I mean, he is literally a perfect fit for the Titans. He's versatile. He's got all the athletic traits that you would want. He just needs to be coached up. And as the sixth edge rusher for the Titans, he's going to have the ability to take that time and develop. And you guys know, it's my opinion, Bud Dupree will be gone after the season. Is Rashad Weaver a longtime starter? I don't know. So add some depth with Amari Barno at 131. 143, a position that is being neglected by Titans fans that we need to quit immediately, and that is safety. I went with JT Woods from Baylor. I think he's got superstar potential. I mean, got incredible speed, plays with good physicality, range. I mean, I think JT Woods, because of his length, some people might see him as a cornerback. He could come down and play that slot cornerback, that Dane Cruikshank role, playing man on tight ends at 6'1". I love JT Woods, love the versatility, love the speed, love the willingness to tackle. He pretty much does everything. I cannot believe that, some of the scouting that I've seen with Woods, the places that they have him. I know he needs to add mass, okay? I know he can be off in his run pursuit angles. I get all that, but for a guy with the tools that Woods has and the size, going to be hard to see him falling this far. And if he is, the Titans got to swoop him up. So I love JT Woods at 143. 204, it's a name you're going to hear a lot from me. It's Tyler Algier coming from BYU. The comparison that I've seen a lot is James Conner from the Arizona Cardinals. He's a physical guy that has also shown some catch out of the backfield chops. I think he can play some special teams as well. I think Tyler Algier has the ability to be a complement in the passing game, but also take carries from Derrick Henry and help spell Derrick Henry as well. I rounded things out at 219 with Matt Hankins, the defensive back out of Iowa. Special teams guy. That's really what I'm focused on. Hankins has a good play temperament. He's a smart player. He gives good effort. He's a special teams guy as a defensive back for me. So I really love that one. The problem is, can you get Christian Watson at 40? I would rather go back to like 33 with Jacksonville if they want to come up and make a play. I think that would make a lot of sense. But Christian Watson, Cole Strange, Isaiah Likely, Amari Barno, JT Woods, Tyler Algier, and Matt Hankins, sign me up for that draft class. But we're going to look at one more 7-round mock draft with a trade in it. And instead of trading the first round pick, I went ahead and made a trade up into the mid rounds to bridge that gap between 26 and 90. We'll go over how that all shook out. Before we get into it, though, do want to tell you guys about the best tasting protein bars in the galaxy from our friends over at Built Bar. They're the best protein bars ever because you get the best of both worlds. The taste, absolutely delicious. Tastes like a candy bar, covered in 100% real chocolate. Great flavors and textures. Some of my favorites are the peanut butter brownie, the salted caramel, the white chocolate cheesecake, the puff bars, the crunch bars, all delicious. But of course, you get the health side as well, as you should with a protein bar. They're low calorie, low sugar, high protein, high fiber. I mean, absolutely delicious. They're great as a healthy meal substitute or just a guilt-free snack. Make sure you go to built.com right now. Use promo code LOCKED15. You're going to get 15% off your order. Once again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Titans fans, we're going to cap off this Mock Draft Monday edition of the Locked On Titans podcast with our third 7-round mock draft with a trade twist. Before we get into it, do got to thank you guys for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen every day. As for your second listen, make sure you guys check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast hosted by Ryan Tracy, former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker. They're breaking down the draft every day from two angles. You get the front office perspective, but you also get that in-depth player perspective with mock drafts, player profiles, big boards, all of that. And subscribe to the Locked On NFL Draft podcast right now, and it'll get you ready for the live coverage of the NFL Draft on the Locked On NFL Draft YouTube channel. Make sure you guys check that out. But this last mock draft, I decided not to move from 26. So pick 26 comes, and I take Treylon Burks out of Arkansas. Love the pick. Love it. But then the Titans don't pick again until 90. And I said, you know what? I need to pick before 90. I'm going to move up. And then a certain player started falling down the board into the 60s. And I said, we're going to go get him. So I took pick 90 and pick 143 and I traded it for pick number 66 with the Detroit Lions. So moving up about 24 spots. With pick 66, I took Sam Howell from North Carolina. I can't believe Howell made it that far. I know a lot of people are interested in him, but tough player, good mobility, great deep ball passer, does a good job. Came from a one-read binary offense, one-read, two route combinations from North Carolina, but I believe that he can improve if he gets a year to sit and he can kind of work on the mental aspect of the game. But I like the traits that are there for Sam Howell, even if he is a tad undersized. So Sam Howell at that value at 66, I love that. Starting out the draft with Treylon Burks and Sam Howell, I think that'd be great for the Titans. Now, that leaves the Titans without a pick until 131. With 131, I took Zach Tom, who I think is more of an interior offensive lineman with a center experience. But since he did play so much time at offensive tackle in college at Wake Forest, there's versatility there. And for a guy at 131 that can play up and down the offensive line, I think that's a good value for the Titans. Pick 169. I always want to say Cody Bellinger, which is the baseball player. But Daniel Bellinger from San Diego State, athletic guy. Give you some yards after the catch ability. It's not a strong suit of him, but he's still got a little bit of it. But he's another kind of Austin Hooper type, Jeff Swaim type. Get open, be physical, can play the Y. So Bellinger is kind of a tight end in waiting for the Titans. Sit for a year, be ready to go in that Jeff Swaim role next year. 204, I'm back, baby. I love him too much. Tyler Algier from BYU for the reasons I explained before. And then at 219, I went with Marquise Bell. Bell is a guy who's got good range, not super physical, but I think he's a guy who can develop as a deep safety who the Titans can kind of mold. And maybe if Amani Hooker does move on in free agency, maybe you can move a guy like Marquise Bell into that spot. For the time being, I think he could play that tight end matchup role. He's not going to be as effective in run defense, but I like him in that role going forward for the Titans. So Treylon Burks, trade up into the mid rounds, get Sam Howell, Zach Tom, Daniel Bellinger, Tyler Algier, and Marquise Bell. Out of the three mock drafts, I think the trade down one is clearly my favorite. You hit wide receiver with Christian Watson. You hit interior offensive line with Cole Strange. You hit tight end with Isaiah Likely. You get really good developmental defensive pieces in Barno and Woods. And then you stock some special. You get running back. You stock special teams with Matt Hankins. I mean, the trade down mock draft is certainly the best. The question hinges on, would Christian Watson be available at 40? If he wasn't, I would feel pretty good about Sky Moore or David Bell there. Would they make it there? I think David Bell will be there at 40 for certain. But I don't know about Sky Moore. I don't know about Watson. But in this scenario, I took what was given to me, and what an incredible trade down. So the trade down scenario is my favorite. Which one is your guys' favorite? Either way, that's going to do it for me. We're going to continue throughout this week, breaking down prospects, going position by position. We're going to start with the offensive line tomorrow at offensive tackle. So that's going to do it for me today, though, folks. As always, I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.